Using balancing and reinforcing, as we've just discussed, I think we can narrow the field to these 14 women. But before we look at them, let's look at 4 prominent candidates who didn't make the list. Let's start with Amy Klobuchar, the senator from Minnesota. Klobuchar was a candidate for the Democratic presidential nomination this year and performed better than expected. Joe Biden credited Klobuchar's endorsement after she dropped out with helping him to clinch the nomination. Given that, and Klobuchar's appeal in the Midwest and with suburban women, it was expected that she would be on Biden's shortlist for vice president. But earlier this summer, she announced that she no longer wished to be considered. It's not clear what happened, but one thing is a safe bet. When someone like Klobuchar said she no longer wishes to be considered, that means she was eliminated, and Biden did her the courtesy of allowing her to withdraw. The question is, why didn't Klobuchar make the cut? One possibility is that Biden's search committee dug up something that neither they nor Klobuchar wanted exposed. There have been rumors, for example, that Klobuchar can be abusive with staff. It may also be that Klobuchar does not fit into Biden's strategy, particularly if Biden decides he must balance for ideology and identity. Then a 60-year-old white moderate like Klobuchar doesn't fit the bill. If that is the case, then prospects like Cheri Bustos and Gretchen Whitmer and Mikie Sherrill may also be out of the picture. When Klobuchar withdrew, she said she believed that Biden should pick a woman of color. This was widely interpreted to be a dig at Elizabeth Warren, with whom Klobuchar clashed during the Democratic presidential contest. Warren, of course, is being pushed by the left wing of the party, of whom Klobuchar has been critical, so she balances for ideology, but clearly does not help with race or identity politics. A second prominent name that I suspect will not make the cut is Susan Rice. Rice, who served as UN ambassador and national security advisor in the Obama administration, would give Biden a younger African-American running mate with extensive foreign policy experience. But there are 2 reasons why I doubt Susan Rice makes the cut. First, Rice has no experience as a candidate for office. Her positions have been earned thanks to her policy expertise rather than her ability to win votes. And if a candidate can't do the latter, she doesn't get to demonstrate the former. On those occasions when Rice did make public appearances for the Obama administration, particularly TV interviews and Sunday news shows, it didn't always go smoothly. And that leads us to the second reason Rice is unlikely to get the nod, the terrorist attack on the U.S. consulate in Benghazi, Libya in 2012. Whether or not Rice did anything wrong in the affair is not the issue. It was a huge rallying point for Republicans, especially the base of the party that is most open to conspiracy theories. Joe Biden does not want his vice president to relitigate the past, especially not an issue that inevitably dredges up questions about Hillary Clinton. I wouldn't be surprised if Joe Biden is elected, Susan Rice becomes the next Secretary of State. But I would be very surprised to see her on the ticket as Joe Biden's vice presidential nominee. This brings us to another potential pick whose past could keep her from the vice presidency, Congresswoman Karen Bass of California. Bass is the head of the Congressional Black Caucus and has a strong progressive resume, both of which make her an attractive candidate for Biden, who needs to balance for ideology and for identity. Additionally, Bass has a reputation for working well across both inter-party and intra-party divides. Still, there are three factors that likely knock Bass out of consideration. First, Karen Bass will be 66 on Election Day, still 11 years younger than Biden, but between 5 and 20 years older than some of the other prospects. For a candidate who needs to reassure voters that it's safe to vote for a 77-year-old man, a vice president who'd be in her 70s by the next election may not work. Second, Bass is from California, home state of the presumptive frontrunner for vice president, Senator Kamala Harris. Comparing the two, Harris is younger and has a higher profile. Bass is more progressive and would likely be more popular with black voters. For Bass to get the nomination, she would have to jump ahead of Harris, which may be too much of an ask. Third, and most importantly, Bass has been quoted on a number of occasions having fairly friendly things to say about the Castro regime in Cuba. She's even visited on several occasions. The Trump campaign is likely to critique anyone to the left of the president himself as a socialist. And if Biden picks a vice presidential candidate from the party's left wing, that person needs to be able to clearly distinguish for voters between the sort of social democracy of countries like Sweden and Norway and the revolutionary socialism of a place like Cuba. If Karen Bass had to spend all of her time explaining past comments about Fidel Castro, especially to voters in South Florida, that might be too much of a headache for the Biden campaign. Our final high-profile candidate who I suspect will not make the cut is Congresswoman Val Demings of Florida. Demings is another woman who could help Biden balance for identity, but if Bass may be too far to the left, Demings may be too far to the right, at least professionally speaking. Demings is a two-term representative from Orlando, which would seem to undermine Biden's goal of reinforcing for national experience. But prior to her being elected to the House of Representatives, Demings had a 27-year career in law enforcement, culminating with her service as chief of the Orlando Police Department from 2007 to 2011. Now, for most of the last 50 years at least, a law and order background has served a candidate well when running for office. But this year is clearly different. With all the attention drawn to the issue of police brutality and institutional racism, a black candidate with a law enforcement resume may not strike the chord that the Biden campaign is looking for. So let's return to the remaining candidates that we stepped away from a few minutes ago. I think one of these women will be the Democratic vice presidential nominee. But when Joe Biden dreams of the perfect ticket, I don't think he envisions any of these women as his running mate. I think Joe Biden's dream ticket looks like this. If Michelle Obama would agree to run, I think Biden would pick her in a second. She remains the most respected woman in the country, and the former First Lady is probably the only person whose presence on the ticket could in itself deal a knockout blow to Donald Trump. But Mrs. Obama has said definitively that she will not be a candidate. So Joe Biden wakes up and sighs, "It was all a dream," back to reality. From these 14 women, let's look at the top 10. We'll start with the 4 women on the list who don't make the top 10. I think it's these. First, former Georgia General Assembly Minority Leader and unsuccessful gubernatorial candidate Stacey Abrams. Abrams, more than any other candidate, has explicitly campaigned for the VP slot. That in itself could be a turnoff for Joe Biden. Both before and after her narrow loss to Brian Kemp in the 2018 Georgia gubernatorial race, Abrams has made a name for herself as a voting rights advocate. And this makes her a strong choice if Biden wants to emphasize that the Republicans' obsession with voter fraud looks to many people like voter suppression. Abrams balances for age, ideology, and identity. But her lack of experience beyond the local level is probably too great an impediment for her to overcome. Had she defeated Kemp, she'd likely be at the top of the list. As it is, I don't think she makes the top 10. One caveat, though. Losing a close statewide race can propel a candidate to contention for higher office. It was the logic of Beto O'Rourke's 2020 presidential bid, although that didn't work out so well. Of course, there was that one guy who lost the 1858 Senate race in Illinois, but did pretty well a couple of years later. So Stacey Abrams is looking at Abraham Lincoln as her model. I think it's more likely that Stacey Abrams will be gearing up for a rematch with Brian Kemp in 2022. If she does run for governor again, her biggest rival in the Georgia Democratic Party may be standing in her way. That person is the most prominent woman from Georgia's moderate wing of the Democratic Party, Atlanta Mayor Keisha Bottoms. Bottoms was an early and vocal supporter of Joe Biden's candidacy, and her campaigning on his behalf has been credited with helping him win in states like South Carolina. Bottoms has a heavy hitter in her corner in the form of influential House Democratic whip Jim Clyburn. Bottoms' performance during the Black Lives Matter protests and after the killing of Rayshard Brooks have drawn national attention, most of it positive. Bottoms would balance the ticket for age and identity, but like Abrams, her weakness is experience. She spent the last 10 years in Atlanta city government, first on the city council and for nearly 3 years as mayor, but that's likely not enough experience to make it onto the ticket in 2020. At 50 years old, Bottoms has a bright future, and I wouldn't be surprised if she, rather than Abrams, is the Democratic nominee for Georgia governor in 2022. Besides the two Georgians, I think Congresswomen Linda Sanchez of California and Terry Sewell of Alabama also don't make the cut. Both have impressive resumes, rising from modest backgrounds to earn law degrees and serve multiple terms in the House of Representatives, where both have been advocates for working families. But both Sanchez and Sewell are likely to be overshadowed by other potential running mates. So let's look at the top 10. At number 10, Congresswoman Mikie Sherrill of New Jersey. Joe Biden will pick Mikie Sherrill if he's convinced that suburban women are the key to winning the 2020 election, and decides that Sherrill's impressive biography edges out Governor Gretchen Whitmer and Congresswoman Cheri Bustos, both of whom have more elective experience. Mikie Sherrill is a first-term representative from a wealthy suburban district in northern New Jersey. With so little congressional experience, it might seem unlikely that she would get much consideration for vice president. But it's her resume before coming to Congress that could earn her consideration. Sherrill graduated from the Naval Academy as part of the first class of women eligible for combat service. She became a naval helicopter pilot and rose to the rank of lieutenant commander in a 9-year naval career. After leaving the Navy, she got a law degree from Georgetown and served as a federal prosecutor. She's married to a fellow naval vet. She's the mother of 4 children, and she's only 48 years old. And when I showed her to my co-host, he said, "She's pretty like mommy." Sherrill's military service gives her an advantage that only one other candidate, Senator Tammy Duckworth, can boast. Combined with her relative youth and attractiveness, Sherrill is a rising star in the Democratic Party. She was elected with a class of other women who boast national security experience, but Sherrill has the brightest future of the group. She's got that it factor that politicians need to go far in politics. I wouldn't be surprised if she rises to prominence in the party over the next decade. At number 9 is Ursula Burns, former CEO of Xerox and a board member of Uber, Nestle, and ExxonMobil. Joe Biden will pick Ursula Burns if he really has his heart set on picking Michelle Obama, but both she and Oprah Winfrey are a firm no. As I said before, Michelle Obama is Biden's dream candidate, but she's not interested. Probably the best alternative to Mrs. Obama would be Oprah Winfrey, but the vice presidency would be a step down in power and privacy for her. So the next best option might be Ursula Burns. As we discussed earlier, Burns has a compelling biography and is the epitome of the American dream. If Biden believed Trump's accusations of socialism were gaining traction, he could find no better answer than Ursula Burns. But of course, that's Burns' downside as well. She may be the first black woman to run a Fortune 500 company, but any Fortune 500 CEO is likely to be a non-starter with a Democratic base. When Biden is looking for a commerce secretary or a U.S. trade representative, however, don't be surprised if Ursula Burns is in the mix. At number 8, Senator Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts. Joe Biden will pick Elizabeth Warren if he decides that he must satisfy the progressive wing of the party and the left makes clear that only Warren will do. Warren is by far the oldest candidate on the short list, and I don't think that Biden wants to pick her, but if the left demands it, he may be forced to. At number 7, Senator Tammy Baldwin of Wisconsin. Joe Biden will pick Tammy Baldwin if he decides he needs a progressive on the ticket, but he doesn't want to deal with the headache of Warren 2024 for 4 years. Because if Elizabeth Warren is on the ticket, her next priority will be to win the nomination in 2024 if Joe Biden keeps his promise and doesn't run for a second term. Tammy Baldwin might be able to satisfy progressives without being the high-maintenance pick that Elizabeth Warren would be. At number 6, Governor Gretchen Whitmer of Michigan. Joe Biden will pick Whitmer if he decides on a suburban strategy and concludes that Governor Whitmer offers the best combination of youth and experience. We've already talked about Mikie Sherrill as an interesting option if Joe Biden decides that the suburbs and suburban white women are the best path to victory. Sherrill offers youth, an impressive military record, and attractiveness, both personally and physically, and let's be honest, looks do count. And I don't say that because Biden is picking a woman. There's a reason why we have not had a fat president or a bald president in the TV era. Dwight Eisenhower accepted, and all he had to do to be the exception was win a world war. But if Biden decides that Sherrill's government resume is too thin and Cheri Bustos is too old, then Gretchen Whitmer may be in the sweet spot in between. There's another reason why Whitmer might have an advantage. She is herself a victim of sexual assault. Although the coronavirus pandemic has taken it out of the headlines, Joe Biden was faced with accusations of sexual assault this spring made by Tara Reade, who was a Senate staffer in Biden's office in the early 1990s. It's a safe bet that Donald Trump will try to make the accusation stick during the fall campaign. And if Biden is worried about it gaining traction, then a rebuttal by a rape survivor like Whitmer may be the inoculation Biden will need. It's a crass consideration, but it likely will be something that Joe Biden has to think about. At number 5, former Labor Secretary Hilda Solis of California. Joe Biden will pick Hilda Solis if he decides to balance for his weakness with Hispanic voters and chooses Secretary Solis' strong labor ties over Michelle Lujan Grisham's healthcare experience. Biden is known to value personal loyalty, so having been a colleague from President Obama's first-term cabinet could give Solis an advantage. We've already discussed her wide range of experience and personal history as the daughter of Mexican and Nicaraguan immigrants. It makes for an impressive resume. On the downside for Solis, she is on the older end of the range of candidates at 62, and she's from California, which doesn't always play well in Middle America. If Biden decides that turnout in the Hispanic community is his path to victory, Solis may get serious consideration. But with Michelle Lujan Grisham in contention, Solis is unlikely to get the nod.